The day Sadie Keating rode into the Barker gang's camp, the sun was bleeding out across the Arizona sky like a wound that refused to close, and every man who saw her coming could not believe what his own eyes were telling him. It was the autumn of 1883, in the Red Rock country south of Tucson, where the desert stretched out in every direction like a vast and indifferent god, and where the law was a rumor that men told each other at night to keep from being too afraid of the dark. The Barker gang had been operating out of those canyons for 2 years, long enough to have become something of a legend, long enough for their leader's name to carry a weight that made sheriffs across 3 territories think twice before pinning on their badges in the morning. Noah Barker was 32 years old, broad-shouldered and brown-skinned from years beneath the desert sun, with dark eyes that had seen things a man could not unsee and hands that had done things he spent most of his quiet hours trying to forget. He was not a man who had chosen this life so much as a man who had been chosen by it, shaped by losses and betrayals, and a world that had never left room for him anywhere else. His camp was hidden in a bowl of red rock and scrub juniper, accessible by a single narrow trail that wound between 2 canyon walls so close together a man on horseback had to angle his shoulders to pass through. It was defensible and secret, and known to no one outside the gang, which was why every single man in that camp stopped what he was doing when they heard the hoofbeats coming down that trail. There were 11 men in the gang, and every one of them reached for something, a rifle, a pistol, a knife, as the sound grew louder and more certain. Noah was standing at the fire, pouring himself a cup of coffee, and he set the pot down very carefully and turned toward the trail entrance without hurrying, because hurrying was something he had long since trained himself never to do in moments that demanded clarity. She came through the gap in the rocks on a gray mare that was lathered and breathing hard, as though horse and rider had come a very long distance very fast. The woman was perhaps 28 or 29 years old, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and was falling around her face in wild strands, and her dress was the dress of a working ranch woman, practical and sun-faded, and she was not carrying a weapon that Noah could see. Her eyes were scanning the camp with a speed and precision that told him immediately she was not a woman who panicked easily. They were green eyes, he noticed, even at that distance. The kind of green that made you think of water in a dry country. She pulled her horse up in the center of the camp and looked around at all the men pointing guns at her, and she did not flinch. Her chin came up instead just a degree and her jaw set itself. "I am looking for the man they call Noah Barker," she said, and her voice was steady. It was the steadiest voice Noah had heard from anyone who had walked into this camp uninvited, and that included men who had done so with guns of their own. Noah walked forward. The men parted to let him through, not taking their eyes off the woman. "You found him," Noah said. She looked at him for a moment, and something passed over her face that was not quite relief and not quite fear. It was more like the expression a person gets when they have been holding their breath for so long that the moment they finally exhale, they are not sure whether they feel better or worse. "My name is Sadie Keating," she said. "Your men took my son." The camp went very quiet. Noah heard the wind move through the juniper and the distant sound of a horse stamping somewhere in the makeshift corral behind the rocks. He looked at Sadie Keating, at the controlled fury in her green eyes, at the way her hands were gripping the reins not with fear but with effort to keep herself composed, effort to be heard, and he felt something shift in the still center of himself. "Get down off that horse," he said quietly. She looked at him for another moment, measuring him, and then she swung down from the mare with a practiced ease that told him she had been riding since she could walk. She stood in the dirt of his camp and looked at him directly, and he found that he could not quite look away. "Somebody give her some water," Noah said to the camp at large. Then he turned back to her. "Come sit down. Tell me what happened." He led her to the fire, and she followed, and he was aware that this was a thing that had never happened before. In 2 years of running this camp, no one had ever ridden in alone, uninvited, unannounced, with nothing but the force of their own necessity to protect them. He had seen men come with guns and men come with money, and men come with information they wanted to trade. But he had never seen anyone come the way this woman had come, with nothing but the truth in her voice and the fire in her eyes. She sat down on the log near the fire and accepted the water that Clem Hadley brought her, a rough and red-faced man who looked absurdly gentle as he handed her the canteen. She drank and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and set the canteen beside her, and then she looked at Noah and told him the story. 3 of his men, and she described them with a precision that was almost frightening: the scar on one man's chin, the missing finger on another's right hand, the blue roan horse the third one rode had come to her ranch 2 days ago. Her ranch was a small operation, 40 acres and a modest herd, east of the Santa Cruz River, a day's hard riding from the camp. She had been widowed for 14 months, since her husband Thomas Keating had died of a fever that swept through that part of the territory in the summer of 1882, and she had been running the ranch alone since then with the help of her son. Her son's name was Will, and he was 12 years old. The 3 men had come looking for a horse, a specific horse, a black stallion with a white sock on his left foreleg. It was the kind of horse men described when they were looking for something stolen, and she had told them she had no such horse, because she did not, because she was not a horse thief and had never been. They had not believed her. And when they left, Will had gone with them, not by his own choosing. Sadie Keating told this story without her voice breaking, but her hands were white-knuckled in her lap. "They took him to make certain I would not go to the law," she said. "They told me if I stayed quiet and waited 3 days, they would let him go. But I am not a woman who stays quiet and waits." Noah had been looking at the fire while she talked, because looking at her directly was something that required more steadiness than he currently possessed, and he was trying to think clearly. He looked up now. "Which 3 men?" he said. "I described them." "I know. I need you to confirm it for me." She repeated the descriptions, and he knew immediately who she meant. Del Fitch, the one with the scar, Joe Prout, missing the ring finger of his right hand from an old knife fight, and Billy Crane, who rode a blue roan everywhere like a signature. Noah set his jaw. "How did you find this camp?" he asked. "I asked," Sadie said simply. He stared at her. "You asked," he repeated. "I rode to Harlow's trading post and I asked the man behind the counter where the Barker gang made their camp. He told me he did not know. I told him I did not believe him and that I needed the information badly. He told me again that he did not know. So I asked the man sweeping the floor behind him, and that man told me." Noah almost smiled. It was the last thing in the world he had expected to feel in this moment, but there it was, a ghost of a thing pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Old Hector," he said. "He seemed like a man who respected a direct question," Sadie said. There was no humor in her voice, but there was something that might have been the memory of it. Noah stood up and looked around at his camp. The men were still watching, guns lowered now but postures uncertain. He found Del Fitch at the edge of the firelight, leaning against a rock with his arms crossed and his expression difficult to read. "Del," Noah said. Del pushed off the rock and walked over. He was a lean man with a quiet meanness to him that had always made Noah keep a certain distance between himself and Del's judgment. "Yeah, you took this woman's boy." Del looked at Sadie and then back at Noah. "We needed leverage to find the horse. She doesn't have the horse. We don't know that yet." "I know it," Noah said. "Look at her. You think this woman is sitting on a stolen horse and playing games." Del's jaw worked. You took a 12-year-old boy from his widowed mother," Noah said, and his voice had dropped to the register that the men in his camp had learned to pay close attention to. "Without asking me, without my say. You made a decision that brought consequences to this camp, to all of us, because now this woman knows where we are, because she came here alone. Del, she rode in alone. You understand what that means?" Del looked at Sadie again. His expression had shifted from defensive to something more complicated. "Where is the boy?" Noah asked. "Back gully. Left him with Crane." Noah looked at Clem Hadley. "Go get him." Clem went. Noah looked at Sadie, who had risen from the log without making a sound, her eyes fixed on the direction Clem had gone, her whole body taut with a concentration that was almost physical in its force. They waited. The fire crackled. Del Fitch drifted back to his rock and said nothing. The other men found reasons to be occupied elsewhere. It took perhaps 10 minutes, but they felt longer. When Clem came back around the edge of the rocks with a dark-haired, dark-eyed boy beside him, the boy's face went through 4 or 5 different expressions in the space of a single second as he saw his mother. And then he was running, and Sadie Keating dropped to her knees in the dirt of the outlaw camp and caught him and held him, and she pressed her face into his hair and her shoulders shook once, just once, and then she had herself under control again. Noah watched this and looked away, because a man had no business watching that kind of thing. Well, Keating was, as promised, 12 years old, and he appeared unhurt, though his expression when he turned to look at the camp around him was a complicated mixture of relief and lingering fear, and the particular brand of furious pride that a boy of his age cultivated to protect himself from the more frightening feelings. Noah recognized it because he had worn that same expression for most of his own boyhood. Sadie straightened up with her hands on Will's shoulders and looked at Noah. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple and direct, and she did not embellish them. "You should not have had to come here," Noah said. "That's on my men, not on you. I am sorry for it." She looked at him steadily. "Are you?" "Yes." "Then why do you lead men who do things like this?" It was a direct question, delivered without accusation but not without force, and the camp around them had gone very quiet again. Noah was aware that his men were listening, and that the question deserved an honest answer, and he found himself standing in the strange light of the fire at dusk, looking at this woman who had ridden into his camp alone to claim back what was hers, and he did not have a good answer. He had spent a long time not asking himself that question. "That," he said finally, "is something I have been thinking about for a while." Her eyes did not leave his. "You should think about it more," she said, "and faster." Then she turned to her son and said, "Can you ride? Are you hurt anywhere?" Will shook his head. "I am fine, Mama." "Then we are going home." She walked back to her gray mare and mounted with that same easy competence, settling Will behind her on the horse's back. Noah walked to where she was and stood at the mare's shoulder and looked up at her. "It is a long ride back," he said. "It will be dark in an hour. I know, you should stay." "Not here," he added quickly, because there was a misunderstanding available in those words that he did not want. "I mean you should make camp for the night properly. You can have my tent. I will sleep outside." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her weighing the offer against everything her good sense was telling her about sleeping in an outlaw camp, and he could see the exhaustion in her face that she had been fighting off since she arrived, the exhaustion of 2 days of fear and hard riding and the particular tiredness that comes from holding yourself together by sheer will. "All right," she said finally. "One night." "One night," he agreed. He gave her his tent, which was a simple canvas affair he had erected against the canyon wall, and he had Clem bring over his spare bedroll for Will, and he made sure that a good distance existed between their sleeping area and the rest of the camp. He ate his supper at the fire and listened to the sounds of the desert night coming in over the canyon walls, the coyotes beginning their conversation, the stars coming out in numbers that never failed to seem excessive, too many, more beauty than the darkness had any right to claim. Del Fitch sat across the fire from him, and the silence between them was the particular kind that had things in it. "You are going to let her go," Del said. "Of course I am. And that is it, she knows where the camp is." "She is not going to tell anyone," Noah said. "How do you know?" "Because she came here alone instead of going to the law. She could have gone to the sheriff in Tucson. She did not. She came herself. That tells you everything about what kind of woman she is. She solves her own problems and she does not drag other people into them." Del turned this over. "Still a risk." "Everything is a risk," Noah said. "Living out here is a risk. The risk I am more concerned about is what happens when men in my camp start making decisions I have not sanctioned that bring widows and their children into this." Del had the grace to look uncomfortable. The horse. I do not care about the horse, Noah said. We are going to find out who has it without using children as leverage. Are we clear? Clear, Del said, and he meant it because whatever else Del Fitch was, he was not a man who enjoyed open conflict with Noah Barker. In the morning, Noah rose before the sun and built the fire up and put coffee on, because it was a habit built into him by 20 years of early mornings in various camps and bunkhouses and prisons and hideouts. The simple ritual of coffee at first light being the thing that told him the day had some structure to it even when nothing else did. He was pouring his first cup when he heard movement behind him and turned to find Sadie Keating standing there, her hair braided back this morning, her dress brushed as clean as she had been able to manage, her eyes clear and alert. "You are an early riser," he said. "I run a ranch alone," she said. "Early rising is not optional." He poured her a cup without asking whether she wanted one. She accepted it without thanking him, which he found he liked. He liked that she had moved past the formal politeness of the night before into something more honest. Will was still sleeping. They stood at the fire and drank their coffee in a quiet that was, Noah realized, remarkably comfortable for two people who had only met the night before under circumstances that were not exactly conducive to comfort. "You said last night that you had been thinking about your situation," Sadie said, looking into her cup. "I did. How long have you been running this gang?" 2 years. "And before that," he was quiet for a moment. "Before that I was a lot of different things. A ranch hand. A cowboy, proper, working cattle drives. A man who made some poor decisions when he was 22 and found himself in prison for 3 years for a crime that was more complicated than the law made it out to be. And then a man who came out of prison with no work and no references and found that the only doors open to him were the ones decent people did not walk through." She looked at him while he said this, not with pity and not with judgment, with something more like the careful attention of someone who was actually listening to what was being said. "What was the crime?" she said. "Rustling," he said. "Cattle. I was working for a man who turned out to be doing it systematically, and I was, genuinely, not aware of it until I was already in it too deep to back out cleanly. The law did not make much distinction. And you accepted that. I did not have many options for appeal," he said dryly. "I was a brown-skinned man without money or connections in a territory where both of those things mattered considerably." She absorbed this without flinching. "That is a common enough story," she said, "and a wrong one." "Yes," he said, "it is. But it does not explain staying," she said. "It explains getting into it. It does not explain 2 years of staying." He looked at her. She met his gaze steadily. "No," he said, "it does not. Staying is a different story." "What is that story?" He thought about this for a moment, genuinely thought about it, because she was asking with the sincerity of someone who wanted the real answer, not the abbreviated one. "When you have been shut out of everything long enough," he said, "you stop believing the door will ever open again. And when you stop believing that, the question of whether you are living inside the law or outside it starts to feel less important than the question of whether you are surviving at all." He paused. "That is not a justification. I know that. I know what the men in this camp have done, and some of it is not something I would choose again. But when you are the man the world has decided has no place in it, you find places where you do fit, even when those places are wrong." Sadie was quiet for a moment. "My husband Thomas used to say that a man's character is not defined by the worst thing he has ever done," she said. "He said it was defined by the first thing he did after he recognized the worst thing as wrong." Noah looked at the fire. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was," she said. "He was very good." There was grief in her voice, honest and settled, the grief of a woman who had done her mourning and carried it now as a permanent part of herself rather than as an open wound. "He has been gone 14 months. Will misses him every day." "And you?" She looked at him. "Every day," she said simply. The camp began to wake up around them, men stirring and coughing and the horses making mourning sounds in the corral. Will appeared at the tent opening, rubbing his eyes and blinking in the early light, and his expression when he saw his mother at the fire with the cup of coffee was the expression of a boy who has spent 2 days terrified and is only now beginning to believe that the terror is over. "Come have some breakfast," Sadie told him, and he came, and Noah watched the two of them together. The way she handed Will the coffee cup without thinking and poured herself another, and the way the boy leaned against her shoulder for just a moment, that quick, unconscious animal comfort of the very young, and then straightened himself, because he was 12 and nearly a man and he had an audience. Noah made them breakfast. He cooked eggs and salt pork over the fire with a competence that surprised Sadie slightly. He could see it in the way her eyebrows shifted. "You cook," she said. "Man has to eat," he said. Will ate with the focused seriousness of a boy who had not eaten properly in 2 days, and Noah refilled his plate twice without comment. After the second refilling, Will looked up at him with dark eyes that were startlingly direct. "Why did your men take me?" Will asked. "Will," Sadie said. "I want to know," Will said. "I think I have a right to know." Noah looked at the boy. "They were looking for a stolen horse and they made a bad decision. It was wrong. It should not have happened." "But it did happen," Will said. "Yes," Noah said, "it did." "Are they going to do something like it again?" Noah considered this. "Not to you," he said. "I can promise you that." Will looked at him steadily, deciding something. Then he went back to his plate. After breakfast, Sadie packed up what little she had in the tent and folded the blanket neatly at the entrance, and Noah saddled the gray mare because the horse was still tired and needed careful checking, and he found that the mare had a slightly loose shoe on her right front hoof and said so. "I know," Sadie said. "I have been watching it. It will hold until I get home." "It might not," he said. She looked at the shoe. He could see her calculating. "There is a settlement with a blacksmith about 8 miles east," he said. "On your way back, Haggerty's. The man there is named Louis. Tell him I sent you." She looked at him. "You want me to tell a blacksmith that the head of an outlaw gang sent me?" "Louis and I have an understanding," Noah said. "He will not ask questions and he will do good work. He will charge you fairly." He paused. "Tell him I said he should charge you fairly." Something moved across her face. "All right," she said. She mounted. Will swung up behind her, and Noah looked up at both of them in the clear morning light, and the thing he felt was not something he had a ready name for. It was not quite the feeling of watching something end and not quite the feeling of watching something begin. It was something that lived in the space between those two things. "Thank you," Sadie said, "for the tent, for the breakfast, and for," she paused, "for being someone I could come to. I was not certain you would be." "You came anyway," he said. "I did." "Nobody has ever done that before," he said. "Ridden in alone, I mean. Nobody has ever walked into this camp the way you did, with nothing but what you needed and the courage to ask for it." She looked at him for a moment. "I did not feel particularly courageous," she said. "That is usually how courage works," he said. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she turned the mare and rode out through the gap in the canyon walls, and Noah stood and watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded entirely, and then he stood a little longer in the quiet. He did not make any immediate decisions that morning. That was not how he operated. He turned things over slowly, the way a man who has spent time in prison learns to do, because patience is one of the few things that cannot be taken from you. He went about the day, spoke to his men, dealt with the usual business of the camp, and in the evening he sat alone by the dying fire and thought about Sadie Keating and her green eyes, and the way she had said every day without looking away. He thought about what she had said about the first thing a man does after recognizing the worst thing as wrong. He thought about that for a long time. 3 days later, he rode to Haggerty's settlement. He told himself he was going to check on something. He told himself he had business near there. These were not entirely dishonest things, because he did have some reason to be in that direction, but they were not the real reason, and he knew it, and the knowing of it was a strange feeling for a man who had gotten very comfortable with certain kinds of self-deception. Haggerty's was a small collection of buildings around a well, the kind of place that existed in that part of the territory in 1883 like punctuation marks in a long and otherwise empty sentence. There was the blacksmith's, a dry goods store, a small cantina, and a post office that also served as the office of a land agent who came through once a month. Noah rode in and tied his horse at the rail outside Louis's shop and went in and talked to Louis for a while about nothing in particular. Louis was a big, quiet man who had moved out from Missouri 10 years ago and had found that the desert agreed with him in some essential way. He did not ask Noah what he was really there for, because Louis was smart enough to know that the answer would come in its own time or not at all. It was when Noah was on his way out that he saw her. Sadie was crossing the packed dirt street toward the dry goods store with a list in her hand and her hair up properly today under a plain bonnet, and she did not see him immediately. He had a moment to observe her without her knowing it, and what he observed was a woman who moved through the world with a brisk and purposeful energy, as though she had a clear idea of what needed doing and had allocated a specific amount of time to do it. She was not looking around. She was going where she was going. Then she looked up and saw him, and she stopped. He raised a hand in greeting. She stood in the street for a moment, and he could see her deciding something, and then she walked toward him. "Mr. Barker," she said, "Mrs. Keating, you are far from your canyon." "I had business this way," he said. Then, because honesty seemed called for by everything about her presence, "I wanted to know the mare's shoe held." She looked at him. "It held," she said. "Louis fixed it properly." "Good." They stood in the street for a moment in the particular awkwardness of two people who have said everything available in the present moment and are not certain whether anything lies beyond it. "Will you have coffee?" she said, which surprised him. "There is a place in the cantina." "Yes," he said. "I will." They sat across a small table from each other in the dim interior of the cantina, which was mostly empty in the middle of the afternoon, and the woman who brought coffee was a broad, cheerful person named Rosaria who did not ask questions and left the pot. "How is Will?" Noah asked. "Quiet," Sadie said. "He is trying to be all right and not quite succeeding. He has bad dreams." She poured coffee into both cups. "He asked about you." Noah looked up. "What did he ask?" "Whether you were a good man." She handed him his cup. "What did you tell him?" She considered. "I told him you were a complicated man who had done some bad things and was perhaps at the beginning of reconsidering them." He looked at her. "That is a very specific answer." "I try not to lie to my son," she said. "He is old enough to understand that people are complicated. His father taught him that early on." "And what did Will think of that answer?" "He said he thought you had kind eyes," Sadie said, and there was something in her voice that was almost amused, warm in a way that had not been there before. "He is 12, so his judgment is perhaps not fully seasoned, but he is usually right about people." "Kinder than you," Noah said. She met his gaze. "I think that is a fair observation," she said. "I can be slow to trust." "Given your history," he said, "that seems reasonable." "Given my present circumstances," she said, "it also seems very inconvenient." He was not certain he had heard her correctly, and then he was certain he had, and the coffee cup sat in his hand, and the afternoon light came through the narrow window of the cantina and fell across the table between them. And Noah Barker looked at Sadie Keating and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, something clean and terrifying and real. "You are not what I expected," she said then, quieter, more careful. "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to dismiss," she said honestly. He thought about this. "I could try harder," he offered. She almost smiled. It was very close to a smile. He counted it. They talked for 2 hours. He did not plan to stay that long, but the conversation had a gravity to it, the kind that forms around two people who are, without quite meaning to, finding that the other person is necessary. She told him about the ranch, about the reality of running 40 acres with a 12-year-old and a single hired hand who was 60 years old and not what he once was. She told him about the specific economics of running a small cattle operation in 1883 in a territory where the larger ranchers were pushing in every direction, and the water rights were a constant battle. She told him about the particular loneliness of widowhood, not as a sentimental thing, but as a practical one, the absence of another mind to discuss problems with, the having to be both parents at once. He told her things he was less accustomed to telling people. He told her about the cattle drive years, The years before the conviction, the genuine love he had for that kind of work, the specific pleasure of moving a herd across open country in the early morning. He told her about the prison and what 3 years of it had done to his sense of what he deserved from the world. He told her carefully about the way the gang had begun as a necessary thing and had become, over time, something that sat less easily in his chest. She listened to all of it. She did not interrupt or offer comfort or judgment. She listened, which was its own form of attention and its own form of respect. When the afternoon had finally exhausted itself into early evening, they stood at the hitching rail outside, and she had the gray mare and he had his own horse, a big roan that stood very still in the way of well-trained horses everywhere. 40 acres east of the Santa Cruz, he said. That is a day's ride from here. Yes, she said. I may come by, he said. If that is something you would find acceptable. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the roan. Will ask me this morning if you might come visit, she said. He seems to feel you owe him a decent introduction under better circumstances. He is not wrong about that, Noah said. She looked at him then directly, in the way that he was learning was characteristic of her, this specific head-on quality to her attention that did not look away from what it found. Come on Sunday, she said. We have supper early around 4. You can stay and talk with Will, and after he is in bed we can sit on the porch. He held her gaze. All right, he said. Sunday. He rode back toward the camp in the dark with his horse moving steadily beneath him and the stars very large above the desert, and he thought about what he was doing. He thought about it honestly. He thought about Sadie Keating on her 40 acres, managing her grief and her ranch and her son with a quiet ferocity that was one of the more remarkable things he had encountered in 32 years. He thought about Will Keating's direct dark eyes saying that he had kind eyes. He thought about the particular feeling of sitting across a table from someone and finding that the conversation was not something you wanted to end. And he thought about other things. He thought about the reality of who he was and what he led, about the warrant that existed in 2 territories with his name on it, about the fact that a man in his position did not exactly come with a future attached to him. He thought about what it meant to ride to a widow's ranch on a Sunday for supper when you were the head of an outlaw gang, and she was a woman with a son who had already lost one father. These were not small considerations, but he went on Sunday. The ranch was modest and well kept, the kind of place that showed the effort of careful hands without the resources to match those hands in scale. The house was a single-story adobe with a porch running along the front, and there was a barn and a corral and a kitchen garden that showed real attention. Will was in the corral with a young horse when Noah rode up, and the boy looked at him with those direct dark eyes and then, making what appeared to be a private decision, walked to the fence rail and leaned on it. You came, Will said. I said I would, Noah said. People say things, Will said, with the philosophical authority of someone who has learned this lesson the hard way. Noah dismounted and tied his horse and came to the fence. True enough, he said, but I am here now. Will looked at him with open curiosity. Do you really lead a gang of outlaws? Will, said Sadie's voice from the porch, and there she was, leaning against the doorframe with a dish towel over her shoulder, and she had an expression that suggested she had heard this coming and had decided to let it play out. Yes, Noah said to Will. Did you rob people? Cattle, Noah said. Horses, some money, never people directly. Will considered this distinction carefully with the moral seriousness of a 12-year-old. Is there a difference? Not a very comfortable one, Noah admitted. Will nodded slowly. Are you going to stop? Will, Sadie said again from the porch, but she said it without much force. That is something I have been thinking about very hard, Noah said to the boy. Thinking is not the same as doing, Will said. No, Noah agreed. It is not. Will looked at him for another long moment. Then he said, I'm going to finish with this horse. Supper is at 4, and he turned back to the corral. Noah walked to the porch where Sadie was standing with something that was definitely a smile this time, small and compressed but real. He is something, Noah said. He is his father's son, she said. Come inside. Supper was beans and salt pork and cornbread, simple and well-prepared, and they ate at a small table in the kitchen, with the late afternoon light coming through the window, and it was the most ordinary thing Noah had experienced in years. The ordinariness of it was almost startling, the way a very quiet sound can seem loud in a quiet room. He ate and listened to Will describe the young horse he was working with, and he asked questions, and Will answered them with growing enthusiasm because horses were, clearly, a topic on which he had a great deal to say, and Sadie sat across from them and listened with an expression that Noah could not fully read but that had warmth in it. Warmth directed not just at Will, who was her natural subject, but at the table, at the scene of it. After supper, Will was sent to do his evening chores and then to bed with the promise that Noah would still be there in the morning to say goodbye, a promise that surprised Noah into giving it because he had not planned to stay the night. But the logistics of the situation made it sensible to sleep in the barn rather than ride back in full dark. On the porch, they sat in the wooden chairs that faced west, and the sky put on a performance of color that the desert specialized in, the layered oranges and purples and deep reds that came every evening as though the sky had something to prove. They drank coffee and did not talk for a while, and the quiet was the same comfortable kind it had been in the canyon that first morning, which was not nothing. "Tell me what you would do," Sadie said, "if you stopped." He turned to look at her. "If you left the gang," she said. "What would you do? Where would you go?" He was quiet for a moment. "I have not allowed myself to think that far," he said. "Think it now," she said. He leaned back in the chair and looked at the sky. "Ranching," he said. "It is the thing I know and the thing I was good at. The cattle drive years were honest years. I was good at the work." He was quiet for a moment. "But a man with my particular history is not a man who can simply walk into a hiring office and apply for work. Not in Arizona, not in New Mexico either now, probably." "What about somewhere else?" she said. "The warrant follows," he said. She looked at her coffee cup. "There are things that can be done about that," she said, with a careful tone that suggested she had been thinking about this, and that the thinking had preceded this conversation by a meaningful amount of time. He looked at her. "What kinds of things?" "My husband had a friend in the territorial administration," she said. "A man named James Welch. He is an honest man who believes in the possibility of reformation. He has helped men before, men who have come forward and provided evidence against others, men who have demonstrated genuine intent to change course. He is not a miracle worker, but he is a man who has influence in the right places." Noah looked at her steadily. "You have been thinking about this," he said. "I have," she said without apology. "Why?" She met his gaze. "Because I think you are worth thinking about," she said. "And because what happened with Willett made me think about all the other children in that situation, all the other families. And that leads to thinking about what it would take for it to stop. And that leads to you. And does it lead anywhere beyond me?" he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. The sky was deepening behind her, the orange fading into something darker and more serious. "It might," she said, "if you give it somewhere to go." He stayed in the barn that night on a clean pile of hay with a blanket Sadie brought him, and he lay awake for a long time listening to the desert night and thinking about a life that looked different from the one he currently had. Not an imaginary life, not a fantasy, but a practical and possible thing, brick by brick, choice by choice. He thought about James Welch and what he might offer that would have value to a man in the territorial administration. He knew things. He knew the location of every major outlaw operation in the Southern Territory, the names of buyers of stolen goods, the routes that contraband moved through. That was real information, the kind that a man like Welch might consider worth something. The kind that might, over time and with the right kind of handling, constitute the beginning of a different path. He thought about the kind of courage it would require. Not the physical kind, which he had in adequate supply, but the other kind, the kind that requires a man to look at the wrong turns of his life and say clearly and without self-deception, "I chose this, and I am choosing differently now." He thought about Sadie Keating in the chair on the porch, her profile against the evening sky, He thought about Will Keating saying, "Thinking is not the same as doing." In the morning he said goodbye to Will, who shook his hand with a gravity that was slightly too large for his 12-year-old frame, and then he stood with Sadie at the gate of the property. "I need to go back to camp," he said. "There are things to settle before anything else can happen." She nodded. "Settling things takes time." "Yes." "I will write to James Welch," she said. "With your permission." He looked at her. There was something enormous in the simplicity of her offer, the straightforward way she was reaching across the distance between his life and the one that might be available to him. He thought about what it cost a woman in her position to offer that. He thought about what it meant that she was offering it. "With my thanks," he said. She held his gaze. "Come back," she said, "when you are done settling." "I will," he said. He rode back to camp and spent 3 days in careful conversation with his men. He did not announce his intentions all at once, because he was not certain what he intended, and he had lived long enough to know that declaring things prematurely was a good way to make them impossible. But he talked to the men he trusted, which was fewer than the total number in the camp, and he told them what he was thinking, and he gave them the choice he thought they deserved, which was whether they were interested in a different path or whether they were committed to the one they were on. Del Fitch chose the path he was on. That was not surprising. Del and 2 others packed up and left in good order, without violence, which Noah had arranged carefully, because he understood that the moment of transition was the most dangerous one, and he wanted no blood shed in it. The men who left took some of the horses and some of the supplies and disappeared into the desert, and Noah let them go with a feeling that was partly relief and partly the weight of knowing he had not been able to bring everyone with him. The men who stayed were 7. Clem Hadley, who had brought Will Keating to his mother without being asked twice. Joe Prout, who had ridden with Noah long enough to have a personal loyalty that superseded ideology. 4 others whose names were not famous anywhere and who had been living this life more out of habit than conviction. And Billy Crane, who surprised everyone including himself by choosing to stay, and who said, when asked, that he was getting too old to keep running, and that if there was a door opening somewhere, he wanted to be on the right side of it when it closed. Noah rode to Tucson and asked around until he found where James Welch maintained his office. Welch was a thin man in his 50s, with intelligent eyes behind spectacles, and the careful manner of someone who was accustomed to measuring both people and situations before committing himself. He received Noah with the controlled caution of a man who is not surprised by very much and has learned to treat everything as a negotiation. Noah sat across from him in a modest office above a land title company and told him the truth. All of it, or as much of it as was relevant. He told him about his history, the cattle conviction, the prison years, the 2 years with the gang. He told him what he knew and what he was willing to share. He told him what he was asking for in return. Welch listened without interrupting, which Noah appreciated. When he was done, Welch took off his spectacles and cleaned them and put them back on. "Mrs. Keating wrote to me," Welch said. "I know," Noah said. "Speaks highly of your character," Welch said, "under the circumstances." "She is an honest woman," Noah said. "She would not exaggerate." "No," Welch said, studying him. "I do not believe she would." He paused. "The information you are offering about the other operations, the routes and the buyers, that is worth something real to the territory and to the federal men who have been working this problem for years. You understand that cooperation of this kind has been used before to secure consideration." "I understand that," Noah said. "You also understand that the process takes time and that the outcome is not guaranteed." "I understand that as well," Noah said. "I'm not looking for a guarantee, I am looking for a fair hearing." Welch looked at him for a long time. "You will write down everything you know, names, dates, locations, routes, everything, and you will make yourself available for follow-up questions." "Yes. And in the meantime you will cease all operations that are outside the law." "Already done," Noah said. Welch paused. "Already done," he repeated as though he was testing the weight of the words. "The camp is dissolved," Noah said. "The men who were willing to take a different path are doing so. The ones who were not have gone." Welch was quiet for a moment. "All right, Mr. Barker," he said finally. "I will begin the process. I cannot promise you what is at the end of it, but I will be honest with you about what I find along the way." "That is all I am asking," Noah said. He rode out of Tucson in the afternoon light and took the road east along the Santa Cruz because it was the road he wanted to take, and he was done pretending otherwise. He arrived at Sadie's ranch in the late afternoon, the same kind of late afternoon they had sat on the porch together. She was in the kitchen garden when she heard the horse, and she came around the side of the house and stopped when she saw him. He dismounted and tied his horse at the gate and walked toward her, and she came toward him, and they met in the middle of the yard with the desert light on both of them. "How did it go?" she said. "He is beginning the process," Noah said. "He made no promises, but he is working on it." She let out a breath that she had evidently been holding for some time. Then she looked at him with those green eyes, clear and direct, and said, "And the camp?" "Gone," he said. "Dissolved. The men who are willing to start differently are starting differently." She absorbed this. He watched her absorb it and watched what it did to her expression, which was something he was developing a considerable interest in studying. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I need work," he said. "Real work. I'm a good cattleman. I know horses and I know range and I know the practical business of running stock in this country." He paused. "You said you needed help, that your hired hand is not what he was." She looked at him steadily. "I said I needed help on the ranch," she said. "Yes. Are you offering to provide it?" "I am asking if you would allow me to," he said. "I can sleep in the barn. I will work for fair wages. It is honest work and I am honest about wanting it." He paused again. "And I am honest about the other reason I am asking, which is not entirely separate from the work." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Will needs to agree to this." "Of course," he said. She called Will, who came out of the barn with hay in his hair and an expression that shifted rapidly when he saw Noah. "He wants to work here," Sadie told her son. "What do you think?" Will looked at Noah for a considerable time. Noah stood still and let himself be looked at. "Can you fix fence?" Will asked finally. "Yes," Noah said. "Good," Will said. "The east pasture fence is terrible," and he went back into the barn. Sadie looked at Noah. "That is a yes," she said. He moved into the barn that evening and began the next morning, and the beginning was a good and solid thing. The work was real and the land was real, and the purpose of it was something Noah had not felt in years, the sense that what he was doing with his hands was building something rather than taking something. He fixed the east pasture fence and the north pasture fence, and he helped with the cattle, and he took inventory of what the ranch had and what it needed, and he made practical suggestions that Sadie listened to with the focused attention she brought to everything. Will was careful with him at first, which was right and reasonable, but the boy had a genuine interest in horses and Noah had real knowledge about them. And by the second week, they were spending 2 hours each evening working with the young horse in the corral, Noah showing Will techniques he had learned on the cattle drives, and Will proving to be a natural with animals in a way that his mother watched from the porch with a private pride she did not announce. The three of them had supper together every evening. It was not a romantic arrangement, not formally, not yet. It was the arrangement of practical necessity, 3 people sharing a table and food and the work of the day. But there was something growing in it that was observable to anyone who cared to look, which included the 60-year-old hired hand named Samuel, who had been on the ranch since Thomas Keating was alive, and who observed everything that happened on the property with the quiet and comprehensive attention of a man who has nowhere else to be. Samuel said nothing about any of this. He was not a man who inserted himself into other people's business. But he did one morning when Noah was helping him with the water trough say, "She has been lonesome," which was all he said, and then he went back to work, and Noah understood that this was, from Samuel, a complete and fully sufficient statement of everything that needed to be said. 6 weeks after Noah came to the ranch, a letter arrived from James Welch. Sadie brought it to him at the fence where he was working, and he opened it carefully and read it twice, because he wanted to be certain he understood it correctly. It said that the information Noah had provided had been reviewed by federal authorities and found to be of significant value. It said that his cooperation was being documented and considered. It said that while the formal process of consideration would take additional time, perhaps several months, there was a reasonable expectation of a positive resolution, meaning the possibility of a pardon or at minimum a reduced status that would make normal life possible. Noah looked up from the letter and found Sadie watching him. "Good news," she said. "Promising news," he said. He held the letter out to her. She read it and he watched her read it, and when she looked up her expression was something that went deeper than relief. "Several months," she said. "Yes. You could stay," she said, "while it is being processed. If you are here doing honest work, it is also evidence of good faith." "I was thinking the same thing," he said. She held his gaze. The September sun was very bright. A hawk was turning in slow circles somewhere above the canyon edge to the east. The world was very quiet for a moment. "Noah," she said, and it was the first time she had used his first name, and the sound of it in her voice was something that moved through him with a warmth he was not prepared for. "Yes," he said. "I am glad you came here," she said. "Not just to work." He looked at her. "I think about you," he said, "considerably, more than is probably appropriate given that I am your hired hand." "You are not precisely only my hired hand," she said. "No," he said, "I suppose not." She looked at the hawk. He looked at her profile against the blue sky. There was a moment that had in it the specific weight of two people standing at the edge of something and both knowing it. "When I am ready," she said, "and when you are ready, I think there is something here that deserves to be acknowledged." "I think so too," he said. "Will needs time," she said. "He likes you, but he is careful. He is his father's son, as I said. He does not give his trust easily, but when he gives it, it is the real thing." "I would not want it any other way," Noah said, and he meant it entirely. So they continued as they were, and the weeks moved forward with the particular quality of time that good and honest work gives it, a weight and texture that idle time never has. October settled over the ranch, and the desert cooled slightly, and the light changed its angle, and everything looked the way things look in autumn in that country, which is to say cleaner and older and more serious. Noah fixed everything on the ranch that needed fixing, which was considerable, and he drove a small herd of cattle to market in the second week of October, and came back with a fair price that Sadie said was better than she had gotten the year before. And he told her how he had negotiated it, and she listened and nodded, and said she would do it that way herself next time. It was a Thursday evening in late October when Will, who had been working on something privately for several days in the way that a 12-year-old boy works on something that he is not quite ready to announce, came to find Noah in the barn after supper. "I want to show you something," Will said. He showed Noah the young horse, which Will had been working with steadily, and which was now responding to the boy's commands with a fluency that was genuinely impressive. "Watch," Will said, and he put the horse through a series of movements, simple but precise, and the horse followed him like a question follows an answer, with a natural and easy responsiveness that told Noah that Will had real instinct and was developing real skill. "That is excellent," Noah said, and he meant it without qualification. Will patted the horse's neck. The horse stood very still under his hand. "My father taught me to start with patience," Will said. "He said you have to be the one who is calm first before you can ask the horse to be calm." "That is right," Noah said. "He was good with horses," Will said. "Almost as good as you." Noah was quiet for a moment. "Your father sounds like he was a good man in a lot of ways," he said carefully. "He was," Will said. He was looking at the horse. "I miss him." "Of course you do," Noah said. "That is the right and natural thing." Will was quiet for a moment. "Then my mama talks differently when you are around." Noah looked at the boy. "How does she talk differently?" "She laughs more," Will said simply. "She does not laugh much. She used to before Papa died. But since then she is mostly just working, just doing what needs to be done." He paused. "She laughed yesterday when you were telling that story about the mule. It was a real laugh." Noah did not say anything to this because there was not much to say. Will turned and looked at him directly. "I think you like her," Will said. I do, Noah said. He saw no reason to be indirect about it. Very much. Will held his gaze with those dark eyes. She has been lonely, he said. She tries not to show it, but she has. I know, Noah said. I just want her to be happy, Will said. She deserves to be happy. She does, Noah said. Will looked back at the horse. I think you could make her happy, he said, with the particular matter-of-fact directness that seemed to run in the family. But you have to mean it. You cannot be someone who stays for a while and then goes. Noah held the boy's gaze steadily. I do not intend to go, he said. I intend to stay if your mother and you will have me. Will was quiet for a long time. The horse shifted. Outside the barn, the desert night was doing its usual beautiful work. All right, Will said finally, and he went back to the house. Noah stood in the barn for a while afterward, feeling something that he did not have a name for, but that felt like the ground shifting under his feet in a way that was not threatening, but rather the opposite of threatening. The feeling of something settling into place. He found Sadie on the porch as he had known he would. She was sitting in the chair with a cup of something hot, looking at the stars, which were doing their usual excessive display across the entire sky. He sat down in the other chair. Will spoke to me, he said. She turned to look at him. I know, she said. He told me he was going to. You knew. He asked my permission, she said. He said he wanted to talk to you man to man. There was the warmth again in her voice, the compressed and real kind. I told him he could. Noah looked at the stars. He said you laugh more when I am around. She was quiet for a moment. That is accurate, she said. Sadie, he said, and he turned to look at her and she turned to look at him. I know what you are going to say, she said. Do you? You are going to tell me that you care for me, she said, and that you intend to stay. And you are going to ask me if that is something I want. Yes, he said. That is approximately what I was going to say. She looked at him in the starlight. Thomas has been gone 14 months, she said. I loved him truly and I still love the memory of him. That will not change, but a person can love a memory and still reach for something living. I have been learning that. I am not asking you to stop loving him, Noah said. I know, she said. That is partly why I am willing to have this conversation. She set her cup down on the porch rail and looked at her hands for a moment. I am not a woman who moves quickly in things that matter. I think you know that about me. I do, he said. But I think about you, she said, and she looked up at him and her green eyes were very direct in the dark. Considerably. More than I perhaps should, given that you are my hired hand. Something moved through him that was partly laughter and partly something deeper. Sadie, he said, I am not precisely only your hired hand. No, she said, I suppose not. He reached across the space between their chairs and put his hand carefully over hers where it rested on the armrest. She looked down at his hand and then up at his face, and she turned her hand over and held his, and they sat like that in the night for a long time, not talking, watching the stars perform their excess, while the desert said its nighttime things all around them. He did not kiss her that night. He was in no hurry and she was in no hurry, and the thing between them had a patience to it that matched its depth. He went back to the barn and slept better than he had slept in years, which was information about his own state that he did not ignore. In November, a second letter came from James Welch, and this one was more specific. The federal authorities had confirmed the value of the intelligence Noah had provided. 3 of the operations he had identified had been successfully disrupted. In light of this cooperation, and in light of the documented evidence of Noah's current conduct, a formal recommendation for pardon would be presented to the territorial governor in December. The process was not yet complete, but the likelihood of a positive outcome was, in Welch's careful phrasing, good. Noah read this letter at the kitchen table with Sadie sitting across from him and Will looking over his shoulder, and when he looked up, Sadie was watching him with an expression that was fuller and more open than any he had seen her wear before. Not relief exactly, though there was relief in it. Something that was relief and joy and the specific look of someone who has been hoping for something for long enough that hope has become a habit, and who is now confronting the possibility that the habit was warranted. December, she said. If it goes as he expects, Noah said. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. What do you want? She asked. When this is resolved, when the path is clear, what is it you actually want? He held her gaze. I want to stay here, he said, on this land, helping build this ranch into what it should be. I want to watch Will grow up into the man he is clearly going to be. He paused. And I want to build something with you properly if you are willing. Will had gone very still beside him, listening. Sadie looked at Noah for a moment, and then she looked at her son, and something passed between mother and son that was purely their own, a private communication built from 12 years of complete knowledge of each other. Then she looked back at Noah. We are willing, she said, and Will nodded once with the solemnity of someone sealing an agreement. December came in cold and clear, as December in southern Arizona could be, the nights sharp enough to remind you that beauty and comfort were not the same thing. Noah had been on the ranch for 3 months, and in those 3 months the east pasture fence was fully repaired, the water system improved, the barn reinforced against winter weather, and 30 additional head of cattle added to the herd through a purchase Noah had helped negotiate with good timing and patient bargaining. The ranch was in better shape than it had been since before Thomas Keating's illness, which Samuel confirmed with a nod, and the kind of practical satisfaction that a man who has put his labor into a place feels when that place begins to reflect it. On the 20th of December, a rider came from Tucson with a letter bearing an official seal. Noah opened it at the gate with Sadie beside him. He read it once and was very still. Then he read it again. Then he handed it to her without saying anything. She read it and looked up. The governor of Arizona Territory, having received the recommendation of the relevant federal and territorial authorities, had granted a full pardon to one Noah Barker, formerly of Cochise County, in recognition of substantial cooperation with law enforcement and demonstrated evidence of rehabilitation and good conduct. The pardon extinguished the existing warrants and restored Noah to the status of a citizen with full standing before the law. Noah stood in the December sunlight on a ranch 40 acres east of the Santa Cruz River, and for a moment he did not trust himself to speak. He looked at the letter in Sadie's hands and then at Sadie, and she was looking at him with her eyes very bright, and she folded the letter carefully and placed it in his hands, and then, without any further ceremony, she put her arms around him and held on. He held her back. He pressed his face into her hair, which smelled like the sun and the particular herb she grew in the kitchen garden, and he thought about all the roads that had led to this specific morning, the wrong turns and the bad years, and the prison and the camp and the gap in the canyon walls. And he thought about a woman riding through that gap alone on a lathered gray mare with nothing but what she needed and the courage to ask for it. And he understood that the road had been. In some way, he was not equipped to fully articulate exactly the road it needed to be. Will came out of the barn at a run because he had seen the rider and knew what it meant, and when he saw his mother and Noah standing at the gate, he slowed and came to a stop and looked at them with an expression that was trying very hard to be restrained. Is it good? Will said. Noah looked at the boy over Sadie's shoulder. It is good, he said. Will's face broke open into a smile that was entirely without restraint, the full, open smile of a 12-year-old who has spent 3 months quietly but intensely hoping for something. And Noah thought that smile was about the best thing he had seen in 32 years. He asked Sadie to marry him on a clear January evening in 1884, on the porch where they had sat so many times, the stars already doing their work above the desert. He did not have a ring, not yet, because he had not had the means or the opportunity to obtain one properly, but he told her that he would, that it was coming, and she told him that the ring was not the thing she was waiting for, and she said yes before he had entirely finished the question, which was characteristic of her. They were married in February by the circuit preacher who came through Haggerty's settlement, in the open air outside the cantina, with Samuel as one witness and Rosaria as another, and Will standing beside his mother with his dark hair combed, and his expression a careful balance between dignity and the joy that kept threatening to undo the dignity entirely. James Welch came from Tucson because Sadie had written to him, and he stood at the back of the small gathering and observed with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has bet on something and seen it pay. The preacher was a thin and energetic man named Brother Aldous, who conducted the ceremony with genuine feeling, and concluded it by saying that in his years of performing marriages in the territory, he had never quite seen a pair come to it by such an unusual path, and that in his experience, the unusual paths led to the most interesting destinations. Noah put the ring on Sadie's finger, a simple band of silver that he had ridden to Tucson to buy at a jeweler's shop, the same kind of ring that had been exchanged in that territory for 100 years, real and unelaborate and meant to last. She looked at it on her hand and then at him, and the look was the complete one, the one that had no reservation in it, and he kissed her in front of everyone with his hand against her face, and Will made a sound that was part protest and part approval, and Rosaria laughed, and Samuel looked at the ground and smiled. The spring of 1884 was a good one. The ranch expanded. Noah had the practical knowledge of years, and Sadie had the particular shrewdness of a woman who had been managing alone and had become very good at it. And together, they were better than either had been separately, which is the way of things when two capable people find each other. They took on two additional hands, young men from the territory who needed honest work and were willing to learn, and Noah taught them with the patience of someone who understood what it meant to be given a genuine chance. Will turned 13 in the spring and grew 2 inches, and developed an opinion on nearly every subject that he was willing to share at length, and Noah listened to these opinions with the kind of attention that can only come from genuinely finding a person interesting. And Will, who had inherited both his mother's directness and his father's moral seriousness, was, genuinely, one of the more interesting people Noah had encountered. They argued about cattle management and horse training and the proper construction of fence posts, and the arguments were good arguments, the kind that two people have when they both know what they are talking about and respect the other person enough to disagree honestly. In June of 1884, Sadie told Noah that she was expecting. He was in the kitchen when she told him, morning light on the table, coffee between them, and she said it simply and clearly, looking at him to see what he would do with the information. He set his cup down and looked at her and felt something move through him that was enormous and warm and slightly terrifying in the best possible way. "When?" he said. "January," she said. He reached across the table and took her hand. She looked at his hand on hers and then at his face, and her eyes were the particular shade of green they got in certain morning lights, deeper than usual real. "Are you well?" he said. "I am very well," she said. "I have done this before. I know what to expect." "You have done it," he said, "but not—" He stopped. "Not with you," she said. "Yes," he said. She squeezed his hand. "I am glad it is you," she said. Will took the news with the considered reaction of someone who has been the only child for 12 years and is now being asked to revise that status. He was quiet for a day, and then he came to Noah in the evening and said, "I want it to be a boy." "I cannot make that determination," Noah said, "but I will convey the preference." Will considered this. "Either way," he said, "I will be useful." "I know you will," Noah said. The summer was the best summer Noah could remember, which was a thing he considered on several occasions and found consistently true. The ranch work was good work, the kind that builds a day into a solid thing, and the evenings were theirs, his and Sadie's, the long light of midsummer fading slowly over the desert, the two of them on the porch talking about everything and nothing, the comfortable accumulation of shared days becoming, without announcement, a life. He told her things he had not told anyone. Not the factual history, which she already knew, but the other things, the interior ones, the shape of what it had felt like to be a man without a place in the world for so long. She listened as she always listened, with complete attention and without offering comfort that was not called for, and she told him things in return about the years of her first marriage, the early hard ones before the ranch was established, and then the fever years, watching Thomas decline and not being able to stop it, and the terrible morning when he was simply gone and the day continued anyway. The sun coming up and the cattle needing feeding and Will needing breakfast and the world refusing to pause for any of it. "The world does not pause," she said one evening in August, looking at the last light on the canyon wall above the property. "No," he said. "But it offers things while it is moving," she said, "if you stay in it long enough and keep your eyes open." He looked at her in the fading light. "What kinds of things?" She smiled. "The full one, the real one." "You," she said simply. He had not believed in the Blue Roan years, in the Canyon Camp years, that a simple word from a simple woman could constitute an answer to everything. He believed it now. The child came in January as Sadie had predicted, a healthy and vocal boy who announced his arrival with an energy that left no one in the house uncertain about his intentions. They named him Thomas James Barker, for his mother's first husband and for James Welch, who had written a letter of genuine congratulation when Sadie sent him the news. Thomas James had dark hair like his father and green eyes, startlingly green even in his first days like his mother's, and Will held him with the concentrated seriousness of someone who has been given something very valuable and is determined not to drop it. "He is loud," Will observed. "You were loud," Sadie said. "I do not remember that," Will said. "Fortunately," Noah said, "you do not have to." Samuel came to see the baby and stood in the doorway of the bedroom with his hat in his hands and looked at the small bundle in Sadie's arms and at Noah standing beside her. And his expression was the expression of a man who has watched a long and difficult thing resolve itself into something good, and who has the good sense to be grateful for it. The spring of 1885 brought change to the territory as it always did, the railroad pushing further through and bringing with it the complicated future that was coming whether anyone in the desert wanted it or not. Towns were growing, the open range was being negotiated and fenced and argued over, and the particular lawlessness of the years just past was giving way to something newer and less wild, not entirely for the better and not entirely for the worse, but different. Noah watched these changes with the attention of a man who had lived in that territory's wild years and was now living in whatever came next, and he found that he was ready for it. He was not nostalgic for the Canyon Camp years in any way that was sentimental. He was nostalgic sometimes for the specific quality of the desert at night when nothing existed but the stars and the silence. But he found that the desert had not gone anywhere, that it was still there every evening beyond the porch, still offering what it had always offered, which was a beauty so large and indifferent it made a man feel small in the useful way, small enough to be humble, large enough to be grateful. Clem Hadley came by the ranch in the spring of 1885 with a woman on his arm, a practical and forthright person named Agnes who had opinions about cattle management and did not hesitate to share them. And they stayed for supper, and it was the best kind of evening, full of talk and laughter, and the specific pleasure of shared history with people who have come through something together. Billy Crane had taken work on a large cattle operation up in New Mexico and was, by his own account in a letter that arrived in March, doing well and finding the honest life less dull than he had expected. Joe Pruitt had gone back to his family in Texas, a fact that had surprised the other men considerably given Joe's long absence from the concept of family. But Joe was apparently the kind of man who needed to make a mess of things before he was ready to repair them, and the repair was, according to his brief and inarticulate letter, proceeding. Del Fitch Noah heard about only once, through a third party, and the news was not good but was not unexpected, and Noah sat with it for an evening and said a private thing for Del in whatever passed for his church, which was mostly the open desert and the stars, and then he moved forward because that was what you did. In the summer of 1885, Sadie turned 30, and Noah organized a celebration that she did not want, but submitted to with the graceful resignation of someone who has learned that some things cannot be argued with. He had asked Agnes, who had become a genuine friend, and Rosaria from the cantina, and James Welch and his wife, and Samuel's daughter who visited from Tucson, and there were 11 people on the porch and in the yard in the warm July evening, and there was food and something to drink, and a great deal of conversation. Will, who was now 14 and nearly as tall as Noah, had helped plan it, which Noah had requested specifically because Will's organizational instincts were formidable, and because involving him in things was always the right decision. Sadie stood in the middle of her yard in the July light, holding Thomas James, who was 6 months old and very interested in everything, and she looked around at the people gathered, and Noah watched her face and saw something move across it that was the expression of someone taking full stock of where they are and finding it more than they had asked for. She found his eyes across the yard and held them, and the thing that passed between them in that look was the accumulated weight of everything. The canyon camp and the gray mare and the coffee at the cantina and the porch evenings and the December letter and the February wedding and Will's growing and Thomas James's arrival, all of it, moving between them in the space of a held gaze. He crossed the yard to her. "Happy birthday," he said. "You organized all of this," she said. "Will organized all of this," he said. "I just provided the impetus." She shifted Thomas James to her other arm. "He is a good boy," she said. "He is," Noah said. "He takes after his mother." She looked at him. "Noah." "Yes, I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want to say it properly." "All right," he said. She looked at him with the full green attention of her gaze, and there was no compression in the warmth now. It was entirely open, the complete version of every look she had given him since the beginning. "I did not know when I rode into that camp," she said, "what I was riding toward. I only knew what I was riding for. But I think sometimes that the two things were the same thing, even if I did not understand that at the time." He was quiet for a moment. "Sadie," he said. "I love you," she said. "I wanted to say it that clearly. I have said it in all kinds of ways that were not quite those words, and I want to say it in those words." Thomas James grabbed a fold of his father's shirt with a small, determined fist. "I love you," Noah said. "I have loved you since you rode through that gap in the canyon walls and looked at 11 armed men like they were a minor inconvenience between you and what you needed." She almost laughed. Almost being the operative word because she contained it to a smile, but it was the full one, the real one, the one that made the whole thing true. "Nobody had ever done that before," he said. "Ridden in like that, alone. I was not going to send anyone else," she said. "He is my son." "I know," he said. "That is the thing that made it what it was." He bent and kissed her on the temple carefully, because Thomas James was in her arms and the party was happening around them. And then he took his son from her arms and held the boy against his chest and put his free arm around his wife. And the desert evening came in warm and golden across the yard, and all the people gathered were talking and eating and being the things that people are when they have somewhere to be and someone to be it with. In the year 1886, the ranch grew to 60 acres with the purchase of the adjacent property, a negotiation that Noah handled with the patience and strategic thinking that had made him, in another life, a very effective gang leader. He applied the same qualities to legal and productive ends, and found that they worked better this way, which was a thing he had suspected for some time. Will turned 15 and grew another inch, and developed a genuine passion for cattle management that went beyond the boyhood enthusiasm for horses into something with a future in it. And Noah and he spent entire evenings at the kitchen table, going over the economics of the operation with a shared seriousness that Sadie observed from her chair by the lamp, with an expression of quiet satisfaction that she did not narrate. Thomas James walked at 11 months and talked at 13, and was, in the assessment of everyone who encountered him, an extremely opinionated and vocal person. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness, and Will's habit of expressing his opinions without being invited to, all of which suggested that the household's future conversations would be lively. Samuel retired in the spring of 1886, formally retired, though he continued to show up and do things around the property in a way that defied the category, and Noah built him a small addition to the bunkhouse that was entirely his own, and Samuel lived in it with the specific contentment of a man who has given his best years to a piece of land and been given something back for it. In December of 1886, 3 years after a woman had ridden alone into an outlaw camp in the Red Rock country of southern Arizona, Sadie Keating sat at her kitchen table on a clear, cold morning and wrote a letter to her sister in Missouri, a sister she had not seen in 7 years, and invited her to come. She wrote about the ranch and about Will and about Thomas James, who was almost 2 and currently standing in the corner of the kitchen, communicating his feelings about a denied request for more cornbread at considerable volume. She wrote about the territory and how it was changing, and about the railroad that had come through, and the ways in which the country that she and her husband had come to was becoming something new. And she wrote about Noah. She wrote about him carefully, the way she did most important things, with the attention of someone who understands that the right words matter and who is willing to take the time to find them. She wrote about who he had been and who he was, and what those two things had in common, which was a fundamental quality she had recognized in him that first morning at the fire, a quality she was still working on naming properly after 3 years, but which was something in the neighborhood of genuine, the deep kind, the kind that does not shift depending on who is watching. She wrote, "He is a man who came to himself the hard way and who is better for it." She sealed the letter and addressed it and set it on the table to go out with the next rider to the settlement. Noah came in from outside stamping his boots, bringing the cold December morning in with him, and he looked at the letter on the table and at Thomas James in the corner and at Sadie at the table, and he hung his coat on the hook by the door and came to the table and poured himself coffee and sat down. "Who is the letter for?" he said. "My sister," Sadie said. "I'm inviting her to come visit in the spring." "What is she like?" he said. "She is opinionated and stubborn and direct," Sadie said. "Runs in the family," Noah said. She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee with a small and private smile. "Noah," she said. "Yes." "Do you know what I was thinking about this morning before you came in?" "Tell me," he said. "I was thinking about that morning in the camp," she said. "The first morning when you made coffee." "I remember," he said. "You turned around from the fire and looked at me," she said, "and I thought, this is a man who is not what I expected." He raised his eyes to hers. "You told me that," he said, "in the cantina." "I know," she said. "I am telling you again." She looked at him across the table in the December kitchen, with the cold light at the window, and Thomas James now sitting quietly in his corner, apparently having made peace with the cornbread situation. "You were not what I expected." "You are still not what I expected. Every day you are still surprising me." "Is that a good thing?" he said. "It is the best thing," she said. He reached across the table and took her hand, the way he had that first evening on the porch, and she turned her hand over and held his. And Thomas James, sensing correctly that this was a moment of significance, chose it to stand up and walk across the kitchen to his father's knee and put both small hands on it and look up at both of them with the serious and concentrated expression he brought to everything. Noah looked down at his son, and then at his wife, and then out the window at the December sky over southern Arizona, blue and enormous and clear in the way it only got in winter, the kind of blue that seemed to be saying something about possibility, about the particular and improbable beauty of where a road can bring you, if you stay on it long enough, and if somewhere along the way you have the extraordinary fortune to meet a woman who will ride alone into the worst circumstances life can arrange, with nothing but what she needs and the courage to ask for it, and who will, in asking, change the entire shape of things for everyone involved. He held his wife's hand in the December kitchen and listened to the desert wind move around the corners of the house, and thought that all of this, the work and the land and the boy becoming a man and the small son on his knee and the green eyes across the table, was the answer to the question he had not known he was asking when he poured that first cup of coffee in the canyon camp and turned around and found a woman sitting straight-spined on a lathered horse in the center of his world, looking at 11 armed men like they were a minor inconvenience between her and what she needed. Nobody had ever done that before. He was very glad she had.